So let's have a look at it together. Isaiah was, as you can see here, one of the, well, it's obviously the major prophet in the Old Testament, certainly the one that's written the longest out of all of them. So the Old Testament is kind of put in the Old Testament that we have, at least, is put into the major prophets, which is Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, and then the minor prophets, and they're only called major and minor because of the length of their books. So you've got four books that are quite long, and they're put into order of length, and you've then got the minor prophets that are a lot shorter in their length. And so Isaiah is our first one that we have. But as you can see in the line at the top there, or the diagram at the top of the prophets, he was a prophet to Judah rather than to Israel. So, and he was around 745 to 685 BC, and so he was still in the time or the latter part of the kings. Now, in Isaiah's time, you can see, even though he was talking to Israel, you can see, sorry, to Judah, and he was based mainly in Jerusalem. You can see that also Israel was still around during part of that time, because you remember from the Kings that there were two exiles. The first was the Babylonian exile, which first took Israel and left Judah and Benjamin in the south alone. And that happened in 722, around there, the fall of Samaria. You can see at the bottom there, where the Israelites were taken off. That's the 10 other kingdoms, or the 10 other tribes, rather, were taken off into exile. So Isaiah lives through all of that kind of period, but he died obviously before 586, which you can see at the very bottom there, which is the fall of Jerusalem. And so he's around during the time of Uzziah or Azariah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah in particular. And there's thoughts, although it's not in the biblical account, that Manasseh, when he was king, he put Isaiah to death during his reign. But he's during that kind of period of history. The book itself, he prophesies really about two different things. One about judgment, and he says like God's going to judge the people. Particularly, he's focusing on Judah here and Jerusalem because of their rebellion, their idolatry. They're not following God in the way that they should be. They're allowing other gods to come in that they're following at the same time. And there is injustice in the land. They're not looking after the widows and the orphans and those on the margins of society like they should be under the covenant law. And so he calls that the kind of the old or the existing Jerusalem and the existing kingdom. And so he said, God is going to bring this judgment upon you because you're not fulfilling the covenant commitments that you had under Abraham and David, or Moses and David, and that you're not fulfilling those, and therefore God's going to judge you for it. But he also speaks as well about hope, and that there is hope for the future. So even though judgment is going to come because of your rebellion against God, there will also be a future hope in a new Jerusalem and in a new kingdom, a kingdom that will be full of justice and peace for all the nations. And so in Isaiah, you see often him talking about not just the people of Israel, that's where the judgment's going to come predominantly, but also that the people of Israel had that original plan by God that they would be a kingdom for all the nations of the earth, so that as God blessed them, they would be a blessing to everybody else around them, and that all the other nations would receive that blessing because of the blessing that God is pouring upon them, but also that other nations will see the blessing that God is actually providing in Israel itself, in the land, and would then sort of want to worship Yahweh because of it. And so as we read Isaiah, it's not an easy read as such, because it seems to me it's a bit like this. It's a bit like a roller coaster ride. You have these tremendous kind of heights about the hope of the future and what's going to happen, and God's going to bring his blessing and everything else. And then you suddenly descend down like a roller coaster into these judgment passages of, and it all seems kind of mixed up together in the whole book. And so it feels a little bit like, as you're reading it, to me, it was like you're going on this roller coaster ride, and you get these tremendous moments of passages that we know so well, and then it descends down into, but God is going to judge you because you're not fulfilling the covenant commitments. But let's have a kind of a look into the book and try and see how it flows through from beginning to end. The book is basically split into two major sections. There's chapters 1 to 39, and then right at the end of 39, he predicts the fall of Jerusalem and a Babylonian exile. And so, even though it comes after Isaiah's actual life time, he predicts that this is what's going to happen, that the rejection will continue towards God, and that they will end up in exile. But then in chapters 40 to 66, in the second half of the book, he talks about the future hope that's coming. But as I said, that judgment and hope is kind of woven into almost every chapter in the book. But let's kind of unpack that a bit. So these are the two, and then that little bit of about the exile is the kind of boundary line, if you like, between the two. So in Isaiah 1, chapters 1 to 12, it talks really about just that. It sets the scene. It talks about the judgment and the hope for Jerusalem. That there is this old Jerusalem that is there now, which is full of rebellion towards God. They're not doing the things they should be doing. They're not worshiping in the way that they should be worshiping. And therefore, judgment is going to come upon them, and God will bring that judgment. But that judgment will be just for a period of time where it will transform their hearts, and then there will be a new Jerusalem and a new Israel and a season of prosperity and peace and blessing that will come afterwards. And so you see that kind of woven right through. And you see it particularly, if you like, as it's kind of encapsulated in Isaiah 6, which we know as Isaiah's calling. And I'll just read it to you. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on the throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were the seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, and with two they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and the thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried. I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. So you can see, I'll just pause there for a minute. You can see that when Isaiah goes and he gets this vision of the heavenly courtroom of God sitting there on his throne and the angels all bowing down and they were calling, Holy, holy, holy. God is so far other than we are. He suddenly realizes his own sin, his own uh, rebellion against God and who he is. He said, I'm a man of unclean lips, but he also recognizes how far Israel or the people in Judah and Jerusalem have fallen short. And he says, I live among a people that are just like that too. And yet, God, we're supposed to be following Yahweh and we're falling so far short. And so woe to me is calling a curse on himself. It's the opposite of the blessings that we see in Matthew chapter 5 at the start of the Sermon of the Mount. Blessed are those. It's kind of going, I'm undone. I'm calling cursing on myself here because I realize how far short I am fallen and how far short the people have fallen. And so what does God do? He says, then one of the seraphim, verse 6, flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, see, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin is atoned for. So here you see a symbol, if you like, of God's cleansing. This is what exile will be all about. It will be like this period that will be kind of painful because you'll be separated from the land and where you are, from the city and so on. But it's a time where it can be that time of rejuvenation, that time of healing, that time of wholeness, and the guilt is taken away and the sin is dealt with, so that when they come back again into the land, they will come back as a different people with a different heart. Verse 8, he said, Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. He said, Go and tell this people, be ever hearing, but never understanding, be ever seeing, but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people callous, make their ears dull, and close their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed. Then I said, For how long, Lord? And he answered, Until the cities lie ruined and without inhabitant, until the houses are left deserted and the fields ruined and ravaged, until the Lord has sent everyone far away and the land is utterly forsaken. And though a tenth remains in the land, it will again be laid waste. But as the terebinth and oak leave stumps when they are cut down, so the holy seed will be the stump in the land. And so here you have like God saying, I would return the people, but they're still going to be the same. They're still going to be, even though you're preaching to them, even though I'm sending you to give them all these warnings, they're not going to listen to you. They'll hear it, but they won't hear it. They'll see it, but they won't really see it because their hearts have been hardened towards me. And so I will cart them off into exile. But he says right at the end, verse 13, there will be a stump. So he likens it to a tree that's been cut down. And you see this picture continue throughout the book of Isaiah of a tree. So Israel is like this tree, and the tree is going to be cut down by a foreign nation, the Babylonians. And but the stump that will be left, there will be a holy seed that will grow from that stump, and it's we pick it up later as the root from the tree of Jesse and so on. That will come, and this holy seed. So there is still hope for the people, even though there isn't for this generation, there will be for future generations. So God has not abandoned them completely, and they're not lost completely, even though they continue to rebel against Him. And so that kind of sets the scene, that chapter of what is to come. And we're left with these questions. Well, who will this holy seed be? Which generation will it come into, and how will it all come to fruition? How will this hope be realized? We understand that there is judgment. We understand that we have rebelled, and there is judgment that will come. But Isaiah then unfolds this in the following chapters. And so we pick it up again in chapter 9. He says these words, which kind of continue the this kind of narrative, if you like, of the after his after his commissioning, this narrative of how it's going to unfold in the future and the hope that God will send. And you'll recognize this as we read it. Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who were in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations, extending it out there to other nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. So he's extending it out to the Gentiles, not just to the Jews. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. We read this at Christmas, don't we? On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. And so we see there that in chapter 9, it's, how will this holy seed come? It will come as this individual who will reign on David's throne, who will fulfill the Davidic covenant and therefore the Abrahamic covenant and the Mosaic covenant. He will fulfill the law. He will provide the justice and the righteousness, the right relationship with God from that time on and forever. And so he will do effectively what Israel have failed to do themselves and the people of Israel have failed to do. And so um, Isaiah, he kind of plants that question, who's going to be this? And then he answers it through this individual that's going to come. But there's still a question like, well, who is it going to be? How's it going to come? And in Isaiah 11, he goes on and he picks up that narrative of this broken down tree that's been cut down. He says a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. So the Israel has been cut down by the Babylonians, but there's still life in it, and a shoot will come from that stump of Jesse. From his roots, a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. The spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the spirit of counsel and of might, the spirit of the knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And he will delight in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash around his waist. That's picked up in Ephesians, as we will see in the armor of God later. The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and the little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear, and the young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. An infant will play near the cobra's den, and the young child will put its hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. In that day, the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. And so you can see that from that initial, time of complete abandonment where they feel cut down and done, it's not the end. There is this hope. So even where there is judgment on one side, there is hope on the other side that God will continue. He's found a way to continue to fulfill the covenant promises and so on. And so, right at the outset in that first section, you can see how it's all kind of laid out and then it's unpacked throughout the rest of the book. So, in chapters 13 to 27, they speak not directly now about Jerusalem and about Judah, but God brings his judgment on the other nations around, the Babylonians and then the Assyrians afterwards and the Persians, but also on Moab and Ammonites and so on, and all the nations around as well. And basically, he brings this judgment on them because of their pride. Uh, just because God uses and raises up the Babylonians, for example, to bring about his judgment on peoples around, doesn't allow them or doesn't give them the right to then become proud in and of themselves and say, hey, we are doing all of this, because God is behind the moving of the nations and so on. And God judges them and says, hey, like I'm going to judge you, because even though you are my instruments to bring judgment on the people of Israel, don't think that you're doing this in your own strength. You're doing it because I am allowing you to do this to bring this time of purification, if you like, just like that coal was taken out the fire and purified Isaiah's mouth. So the exile is a time of purification for the people of Israel. As an aside, if you like, Babylon in the scriptures is often used as a type of Antichrist or as Satan or as evil because of this. And we see this in these chapters here. I'm not going to go into it, but there is an allusion to Satan in it, and Satan rising up, and it says that he wanted to become greater than the Most High and sit on the throne of the Most High, and therefore God threw him down and so on. Which again is picked up in Ezekiel as well. But you'll see these allusions to Babylon also in the book of Revelation. So you see it here in chapter 14 about the God's judgment on the Babylonians because of their pride. but that illusion or that type, if you like, is picked up in Revelation 17 and 18, where it really just says, Babylon, Babylon, the great prostitute has fallen and so on, because of that pride that they have in themselves and in their own abilities, and not recognizing who's really in control of everything. And so when you see Babylon mentioned in the scriptures, just recognize that it's kind of a type, if you like, of people who have proud pride in themselves, in their own abilities, in that they have the power, if you like, to determine their own futures, and they take no notice of who God is in this whole process. And you see that it come most strikingly in Revelation with the Antichrist and so on. Okay, back to Isaiah here. You then carry on in 24 to 27 with two poems really about two cities, and it just really contrasts the two kind of options, if you like. There's the rebellious city that Isaiah describes as leading to judgment and ruin, and then there is the obedient city, and it talks about peace and prosperity, a place where there is no more any suffering, no death, which again is picked up in Revelation 21 in the new heaven and the new earth and the new Jerusalem. And so it's these kind of pictures that Isaiah brings are used so often in the New Testament. I think it's something like 419 times in the New Testament that Isaiah is either quoted or alluded to in its pictures and so on. It's the most quoted Old Testament in the New Testament, and you can see why, because of the unfolding story. And we'll see that. We'll come back to that in a minute, a little bit later on. Moving on, we have chapters 28 to 39, which goes back, and the eye of the attention goes back onto the rise and the fall of Jerusalem. And again, Jerusalem is judged because of their reliance on Egypt, on the flesh to save them instead of God. The the problem with Israel, if you like, geographically, or maybe it's not a problem, but their issue was that they to the east of Jerusalem, or obviously to the west of Jerusalem, you've got the Mediterranean Sea. To the east of Jerusalem, you've got desert. And in those days, you couldn't really cross the desert very easily. And so most of the major nations were either up in kind of Turkey today or over in Mesopotamia, in Iraq and Iran and places like that. And the other big nation was Egypt. And so Israel was basically, right in the middle of it all. And so generally what happened was that if they got attacked from the north, because the nations like the Babylonians or the Assyrians were coming down from the north around the desert region, uh, in their flesh, they would often then look to Egypt, who was the other big power, to kind of help them. So they would sell all their gold and strip the temple and get rid of everything that people like Solomon had put in their place, and with the hope that the Egyptians could come and rescue them and save them. And if the Egyptians were attacking them, they would look to the north and try and do the same thing and get some of the other nations to come and protect them from the Egyptians. And so God is kind of going, yeah, but I said I would protect you in the law, in the covenant relationships. And so instead of looking to God, uh, they look to the other nations around them, and God judges them for that, and Jerusalem in particular. And you see this particularly in chapters 36 to 38 with the story in Hezekiah, if you remember reading it, who the Babylonians come, and they're there camped outside. They've just destroyed everybody else, and they're gonna, wipe out Jerusalem. And Isaiah comes and he says, "Don't worry about it. Like just and Hezekiah is in sackcloth and ashes, and he reaches out to God, and Isaiah's there, and he said, God will deal with it. You rely on God, and God will sort you out. He will protect you." And Hezekiah does just that. And then this angel of God is sent during the night and kills 185,000 Babylonian soldiers in chapter 37, verse 36, and brings this amazing victory. And they go back, and they leave Jerusalem and Judah alone. and it just shows you that that there is this spiritual battle that's going on between the people there. To who are they going to rely on? They're going to rely on God, and God's every time they rely on God, then God shows them that he can protect them, or are they going to rely on other nations around? And when they rely on God, then He brings the victory. But straight afterwards, in chapter 39, um, he he then um, a little bit later on, but it's straight after in Isaiah. There is an envoy that comes from Babylon, and he shows King Hezekiah shows them all of the wealth in the temple, all of their armies, their resources. He shows them absolutely everything because he's like his pride gets the better of him, and he relies on his flesh. It's similar to what David did. We read in the Kings and so on, that David did the same thing and then repented when he counts his armies as himself. Sometimes God says, go and take account of who you've got in your army, how many people can go fight. But there are times where David just does it himself, and then he has to repent of that because he's relying on his own strength and saying, hey, how powerful am I, rather than relying on God. Then Isaiah prophesies at the end of chapter 39, the end of this first section, that Babylon uh, will turn on them and betray them. And this occurs 100 years afterwards. But he says, it's not going to happen in your lifetime, Hezekiah. Which Hezekiah goes, that's fantastic. That's brilliant. I don't really care about the future. But he says that Jerusalem and Judah will fall because of their sin, because of their rebellion against God. And we know from the book of Second Kings, chapter 24 and 25, that occurs 100 years later on after Isaiah gives his prophecy. So that's the kind of the first part, and then you've got that little bit about the exile that are going to be taken off into exile at the end of chapter 39, which kind of stops the first half of the book, if you like, and the second half of the book kind of skips, if you like, and it explores the hope of a coming kind of new Jerusalem. So there is a hope there that after exile, the exile will kind of purify them, just like that fire purified Isaiah in his mouth, and then they will be able to return back home as a new people with a new heart for God and a new passion to serve Him, and everything will be fantastic. And so there is these chapters at 40 to 48 that talk about all this comfort and this hope, and that the Babylonian exile is now over. And the author writes as one kind of living in that time of post-exile, which of course then raises a question for us. Well, Isaiah has died like before the fall of Jerusalem. He's died before, like 100 years, after that prophecy. So he didn't live through the exile of Jerusalem. He didn't live through the exile of the people living in Babylon, and he didn't live through any time of their return. So how is it possible that he is writing as though they or have returned from exile, which is what the second part of this book is all about? How is that even possible when he died, centuries before? And there's two possible answers to that question. Some believe that Isaiah was kind of prophetically transported into the future time, and what he wrote and what he saw was because God revealed the future 150 years or so into the future, and God revealed it to him. So a little bit like in Revelation, where God takes John into the heavenly courts, if you like, and shows him what's going to happen, says, write this down. In the same way, some people think that Isaiah kind of was taken forward, if you like, and he saw it all and he wrote it down at that time for future generations. The second alternative is that Isaiah wrote down all his messages about judgment and hope onto certain scrolls, some of which he sealed up. And it says that specifically in 8:16, 29, 10 to 12, and 38 to 9. It says that he wrote it down, he sealed it, and he gave it to his disciples. And these were the kind of messages of future judgment and future hope. And he passed them on to his disciples, who kept them without opening them and passed them on to the next generation and the next generation. It was like, in a sense, putting a time capsule, if you like. And it wasn't until after exile that that was the time where they could actually open these and read the judgments and the hopes and everything else that Isaiah had written down in his time. And what they did was they read those and applied it in their own day as disciples of Isaiah, and that God then inspired those disciples to write down these prophecies in their day. So that chapters 40 to 66 are the what they call Deutero Isaiah. They're written by the disciples of Isaiah after the exile, some 150 years later or so. But they're based on the judgments and the hopes of these scrolls that it says in the first part of Isaiah that he sealed up and that he gave to his disciples. Either way, doesn't really matter what you think. You know, God has inspired His word, and it just, in a sense, we don't know which is which. So you can take your choice about that. But chapters 40 to 66, they announce that God's future kingdom has now come. And there is this tremendous hope that Israel will respond by being what they call now God's servant. So it started off as the seed, if you like, from the root of Jesse. Now the terminology slightly changed, and they are to be the servants of God, fulfilling the covenant promises. And that because they've been in exile, they've cried out to God. God's heard their cry. He's brought them back. That they will now follow Yahweh with 120% of their hearts and their lives, and there will be a new golden age, if you like the days of David and Solomon, etc., or the first half of Solomon at least. Problem is that as soon as they come back in chapter 40, verse 27, they start complaining against God, just like the people in the wilderness, really. And the next few chapters, chapters 41 to 47, are really set up like a courtroom or a trial where God responds to their complaints. And their complaints are basically that God abandoned them, that God doesn't look after them, that God was silent, that God probably wasn't strong enough, and therefore the Babylonian king gods were stronger than he is, and that's why they lost, and that's why he couldn't, rescue them, etc., etc. And God responds to these complaints in two ways. First, he says exile was not due to his neglect, but it was this judgment, this purification period for sin, if you like. It was because of their rebellion against him that he allowed this to happen, and it was for Israel's sake that God raised Persia, because to overthrow the Babylonians and to bring Israel back home. And under King Cyrus of the Persian kingdom, he now brings the people can come back home, back to Jerusalem, rebuild the walls, rebuild the temple, which is what we see in the books of Nehemiah and Ezra in the Old Testament. And they therefore fulfills Isaiah's prophecies. And so God is kind of responding to these accusations against him. And God is saying, therefore, I am the king of history. I am the one that makes it all happen. I am the one that is over it all. I am the one that orchestrates it all. And Israel should therefore see and look for God's hand at work in all of this. It doesn't happen by chance that these are God's people, and therefore what God does is planned, and it's carefully thought out, and there are reasons and rationale for doing everything. And they should tell the other nations to follow Yahweh, because contrary to what they're accusing him of, that actually God is the God of history, and God is the one that makes all this happen. In chapters 48 to 55, we sadly read in chapter 48 that Israel is just as rebellious as before. They don't buy this. And finally, what God does is he disqualifies them as his servant people. And he said, you know what? You're not going to be my people any longer. I'm fed up with this. I'm fed up with, I've tried to purify you in exile. I listened to your crying out and saying, God, please help me, send us back. I did all of that, and still you complain. Still you just trust in yourself. Still you won't, serve me and acknowledge me. But God still has his covenant promises. He's still promised to bless the nations, and he needs to fulfill the Abrahamic and Mosaic and Davidic covenants. And so instead of God raising up this is where a kind of a change happens, if you like. Instead of God raising up a nation of Israel to be his servant people, uh, Isaiah sees that God will raise up an individual who will be that perfect servant of God, that perfect example to follow that Israel could never be. And we see that coming out in chapter 49, and the servant's going to fulfill everything. He's going to restore Israel back to God, and he will be a light to the nations. We'll just read that 49, 5, and 6. It says this, and now the Lord says, he who formed me in the womb to be his servant, to bring Jacob back to him and gather Israel to himself, for I am honored in the eyes of the Lord, and my God has been my strength. He says, is it too small a thing for you to be my servant, to restore the tribes of Jacob and bring back those of Israel I have kept? I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth. So you can see here how the Abrahamic covenant is being fulfilled through this individual rather than through the people of Israel. And so Isaiah sees this kind of change in this approach, if you like, of God because of the rebellion of the people. And so instead of the people, he will choose someone from them to be this individual, the servant, who they will see as the kind of the Messiah that is to come. But the question then is, well, how is God going to do that? And we see it in the most unexpected way in chapter 52 and 53, which you'll know. We'll read the suffering servant, because he sees that it will be done through suffering and rejection and death at the hands of his own people. But in that, he will come alive again, and by his death, he will provide a way for everyone to become in a right relationship with the Father. And so you see this most incredible passage in the suffering servant. You can see why this was picked up by the church, the early church, and why Isaiah became so pivotal in understanding who Jesus really is, and why they kept on referring to Isaiah in these passages in Isaiah, and why it's so important for us and for those new believers to say this is fulfilled in Jesus Christ. This is why he went to the cross. This is why he died, and so on. So let's just read it again and remind ourselves in Isaiah 52, verse 13 to 53, verse 12. It says, see, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted, just as there were many who were appalled at him. His appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So he will sprinkle many nations, and kings will shut their mouths because of him. For what they were not told, they will see, and what they have not heard, they will understand. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot. There he goes back to the analogy there of the tree of Jesse and so on being cut down, and the shoot coming out. He grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Just an aside there, that many people quote that when they talk about physical healing. But as you can see in the context of where this comes, it's all about our sins, not about our physical nature. The healing is about our rebellion against God, and he's being his blood being poured out for us. He's being pierced for our transgressions, not for our human sickness, and so on. So we're kind of misquoting when there are other passages that are much better to use when we're talking about physical healing. Anyway, back to it. And by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each one of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers are silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet two of his generation protested, for he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was for the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. Here's the resurrection. And by his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sins of many and made intercession for the transgressors. And so you see the death of Jesus and the resurrection of Jesus, and so the New Testament writers look at all of this and say, you know, who this person is, the stump that comes out, the branch that comes out of the root of Jesse. You see who this is, that God has changed from the nation of Israel. It's Jesus Christ, because he fulfills all of this. One of the prophecies was there that he was assigned a grave with the wicked, but with the rich in his death, because Joseph of Arimathea, who was a rich man, allowed him to lay in his tomb and so on. And so they use that in the New Testament as well. But you can see how influential all of this is, and that God has changed this um, kind of system, if you like, or what he's going to do, because Israel keep on rebelling. And so he will find amongst them an individual. So instead of the servants being a collective, it goes down to an individual. And then in Isaiah 54 and 55, there are two ways that we respond to the suffering servant. And there are those that respond with humility and with acceptance, and they become servants and seeds, it says. They become like the part of that stump that starts to regrow again, and they're joined with Christ, with Jesus, in becoming servants of Yahweh. And therefore, the blessings of the Messianic kingdom that were promised through Abraham and then through Moses and David and so on, they become part of those who accept. But there are also those who will reject, and the Bible just says they're going to be called the wicked, and they don't become part of the blessings of the Messianic kingdom. And so there are these two, responses that come to the suffering servant and to the understanding of what this is all about. And then the book concludes with this most amazing kind of symmetrical pattern, if you like, of Isaiah 56 to 66, where right in the middle of it, you get 60 to 62, where God announced, or the servant announces, that God's kingdom will come. And we know 61, 1 and 2, which is what Jesus uses remember when he goes into the temple at the start of his ministry, and he finds the scroll, and he turns to this passage in Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has proclaimed me to preach good news to the poor, to heal the captives, release sight to the blind, and so on, right? That's Isaiah 61. And that's the bit that Jesus says today, that's become fulfilled in your hearing. And they understood what that meant. They understood that he was saying that I am this seed out of the root of Jesse. They understood, which is why they wanted to throw him out and to throw him off a cliff, and so on. And that's what, Jesus was saying. I'm the fulfillment. I am the Messiah that is to come. And he says it right at the very start of his ministry. Either side of that, in 59 and in 63 and 64, you have prayers of repentance. And so like the it's like for us to be able to see it, for us to be able to realize it, you've got to come with that kind of repentant heart and that repentant spirit to come and see the God who is going to reveal the Messiah. And if you come with pride in your heart, if you come with that rebellious nature, you're not going to see and you're not going to hear the servant's announcement and realize the blessing that comes with it. Either side of that, you have in 56 to 58 a contrast between the wicked and the servants. The wicked will be judged and they will be thrown out, which is, again, you see that in the book of Revelation, where there is a new Jerusalem that's built. And inside that, you get the servants who are there with God, and outside you get the wicked who are with weeping and gnashing of teeth because they've been judged and they've been removed because of the rebellious nature of their hearts and so on. Whereas the servants who have been forgiven are welcomed into the New Jerusalem. And you see that in these two kind of passages either side of those prayers of repentance. And then right at the very start and right at the very end of this section, you see this call that all nations are going to be invited to the New Jerusalem. It's not just for the people of Israel, that the Abrahamic covenant in particular, where you will be a blessing to everybody, will be realized, and that all of that will kind of come to fruition because of what Jesus Christ has done for us. And so you can see right at the very end both the interplay, if you like, of judgment and of hope that Isaiah starts and continues this whole roller coaster ride of this book through, and how that is played out and how that is changed throughout the narrative from the people and their rebellious nature, and then into a servant that will follow and will be exactly what God wants them to be, and will be the one that brings in and ushers in through his own death, his own time, if you like, of exile, which is what the cross is all about. Doing that exile again, if you like, for us, so that we don't have to go through it, but we can have that intimacy with God. Which is why it's my God, why do you forsake me, and all those kind of things. So that's kind of, if you like, a quick overview of the roller coaster ride that is the book of Isaiah.